So good morning friends. Adu is being again back from the EduBytes channel. So now we are going to be studying about the vectors. Now part 2. In the part 1 we have already seen about we would have seen already about vectors. Part 1. One minute. Part 2. So now in vectors part 1 I simply told about what is a vector. Vectors are just arrows in which they have magnitude and direction. So here, so magnitude on it, magnitude and direction. A very important thing to understand: magnitude and direction. They have magnitude and direction. So this is what is vector. Vector we have already seen about what is an equal vector, negative of a vector, multiple of a vector, and more interestingly we have already seen about the north south news, north east, west and south. Here we have seen about how to find the direction of that vector. So here let's continue about that itself, the news, north south east direction. I like the concept of that. So let's draw the simple line, north south directions. Let's draw the simple line. So maybe this is the north south direction and there is a vector, maybe a vector like this, which is actually 40 degrees. So as I already told you in the previous part, it's actually 40 degrees south of east. Very easy, a very simple thing to calculate. This is what we learned in part 1. But this actually, according to scientists, and while doing a lot of calculation, this actually is complicated. Why do we need to write 40 degrees south of east? Very, very, very complicated. So let's try to do something just simpler, or let's try to say it's actually simple. So for that we can be able to say, for example, let's take a vector like this, basically 20 degrees, a vector. So basically this vector we can say or represent as 20-degree vector. This is how we represent. Here for 40 degrees we can represent as minus 40-degree vector. So I think you can be able to understand what I mean. If you take the origin, the x-axis, origin, from the x-axis, this line, from here we calculate all vectors. For example, this is the 90-degree vector. So here we call this as 90 degrees. The vector is 90 degrees. What about this vector? Maybe this is 30 degrees. And so the vector here is usually calculated in the clockwise direction. So all vectors which is all degrees which is actually coming from the x-axis to the anti-clockwise are measured in positive, to anti-clockwise, so that's measured in negative. So 180 minus 30, it's actually minus 150. So minus 150-degree vector. This is something very important to understand, very useful and very short. In an instant we can be able to do or easily refer to that as minus 20 minus 40. So I'll give you one sum. Maybe the vector is like here, maybe this is 40 degrees. So what will you say the vector is about? So here basically this is 90. So 90 plus 40, 120, 130 degrees. So this is a 130-degree vector. Very simple, very straightforward. So please try to understand, very important concept, very interesting concept. So this is all about. So maybe let's try to have a, now we will be going into new topic in vectors. Basically in this topic we will be studying about I cap and j cap. This is also very important in the new concept. So basically I cap is basically refers to the line drawn or a vector along x-axis, a vector along x-axis. J cap is basically line or a vector along y-axis. This is something very important to understand. Basically this is a unit vector. So basically I'm referring to a unit vector. This is what is I cap and j cap, very useful. So suppose this is a vector, okay, this is a vector. So this vector comprises of two things, very important two things, this plus suppose brown plus this. Oh, sorry. Plus this. Okay, so this is basically j cap 1 minute. This is basically j cap, and this is basically I cap. Very important concept. This is positive I cap. This is positive j cap. So some I cap, some y cap, x I cap, and so x I cap plus y j cap. Very important and very useful concept. Thank you. Okay, now x I cap plus y j cap is basically this vector. That's how we describe a vector. There's also another thing which is actually called as k cap. K cap is basically coming which is outwards or inwards, pointing towards us. I couldn't be able to draw this because two-dimensional. Vectors is basically three-dimensional. For mainly for k cap, this is what is we call as k cap. Okay, so this I cap and j cap are something which is very very important to understand in many terms or ways. So let's try to solve a sum. So basically, there is a vector like this, and there is also another vector pointing towards this. So, uh, yeah, okay. So try to find this vector. So this may be a vector, b vector, c vector. This is actually triangle of addition. I will be teaching that shortly in the next part. So here we can be able to see that b vector could be by 5 j cap. This could be like 6 I cap. So they may ask you a question: what is the components or what is the value of the vector c vector? That is basically 6 I cap plus 5 j cap. You just basically add this. We are just adding the x component and the y component. Simple addition. There is nothing more complicated in this vector. Just simple addition: 6 I cap plus 5 j cap. Something very important and very useful also. I will be teaching this vector addition shortly in this next part. Something very 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 useful. We can actually find the magnitude and so on, but this is very important. Let me also introduce another arrow like this, maybe some arrow like this. So here we can actually use study vectors or I cap and j cap through grids, but I'm not able to draw with grids, so I'm just teaching like this. Okay, so basically this is minus I cap because the arrow is in the negative direction. You can be able to see, right? This is usually the positive direction. You can be able to see in the coordinate axis. This is we refer to as positive, and the upwards is positive, right? For j cap. So there could be another vector um, like this j cap direction. Okay, I am sorry. This is in this direction. So here we can be able to see that vectors, the y component and x component could also be in negative direction. This is I cap. So some minus x I cap and some minus y j cap. Very important to understand because j cap and the x component and the y component can be in negative. Very very important. They can be in negative. That's all guys. This is only very important to understand. They may just ask you a simple addition. You may just use a simple addition to solve basic concepts like this. So very important, very useful concept. Please understand the basics of it. You can be able to clear this. Is actually the base for vectors. Something very useful. So very interesting. Thank you friends.